Blessings, everybody. This is Dale. Thank you so much for joining with me on the Word Podcast. We're continuing our examination of the book of Daniel, and we're in the 6th chapter. And I want to go back and just reread the first 4 verses that we've gone through in the previous 2 episodes. Remind us of the context, right? Set the scene. So here we are, Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps, because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So we've already seen this, the structure that Darius was setting up in the new empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, had just conquered Babylon. And Daniel wound up being one of the top 3 commissioners overseeing the governors, the satraps. And you think, well, everything's great. The king really finds out that Daniel's got an extraordinary spirit, and he's going to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So Daniel will be second in command to the king. Well, we saw in the last episode what happened, verse 4. Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. But they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. So these satraps, these governors, and the commissioners all apparently joined together and were trying to find some accusation against Daniel related to the government affairs, what he did as far as his job, and was he corrupt or anything like that. They could not find anything. He was faithful. There was no negligence. There was no corruption. Well, don't you know, that just made it even worse. See, they're jealous to start with, right? That's the reason they're going after this, because here's this one who really was not of this region. He was really a Hebrew from a conquered land. And here he is. He's going to be second in command. Well, these folks just couldn't bear with it. But they could not find anything related to his job to accuse him of, to find fault with. So what do they do next? Watch this, folks. This is really important, because this is the type of thing that we as believers face today. Okay, the same exact thing. Verse 5. Then these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. The law of his God. What's this talking about? Well, they're saying, we can't find anything that he's done wrong as far as the governmental affairs, as far as his job performance. He has been exemplary in that. He hasn't been corrupt. So what we'll have to do, we'll have to find a ground of accusation related to the law of his God. In other words, let's see if we can do something that will reveal him to be a hypocrite, perhaps, in relationship to the law of his God, or maybe even use the law of his God as leverage to get him to do what we want him to do, or to make him look bad, whatever it may be. So, verse 6, then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. Now, this is interesting. So we're going to be able to look at the first part of what happens right here. Then we'll look at the balance of it later. The commissioners and satraps came by agreement. What does that mean? Yeah, they worked it out. They planned this thing. They'd all agree to say this same type thing. And they had an agenda right here. This wasn't just a happenstance thing. It was planned out. So they come to the king and they say this, King Darius, live forever. Verse 7, and it's them continuing to speak. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man beside you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document, so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. Now, do you see what's going on right here? they were seeking to entrap Daniel, and they would go to any length to do so. We see, folks, this same exact thing happening within the political realm today, political realm yesterday, political realm in the future is nothing new. We see this kind of thing happening within the organizational church. I see it all the time. And it's just standard practice and procedure to act and behave this way. But look what they did. They came together by agreement, and they deceived the king. Okay? They deceived the king. And they deceived the king in a couple of ways. They come to, oh, live forever, live forever. The primary way they deceived him, they said, all the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the high officials, the governors, have consulted. And we believe you need to establish this statute, okay? This thing, this law, that everybody should only worship your God and no other gods. Well, to start with, all the commissioners did not agree to that. Daniel didn't agree to it. Daniel wasn't even a part of it. And he was one of the main three commissioners, and he was going to be over them very shortly. So they lied to the king right here, and then they're manipulating the king. They're manipulating the king for their own purposes. So they lie to the king, they manipulate the king, and then they come along and they entrap the king. And you say, what do you mean they entrap him? Well, look what they said. Establish this statute and enforce an injunction. In other words, establish this law and make it really, really have some bite to it. That's funny. I didn't think about that. Have some bite to it. Because the idea, if any man, what's it say, who makes a petition to any god or man besides you for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. The bite to it, right? Yeah, the whole idea being there's going to be tremendous punishment. But then they said this in verse 8. Establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which shall not be revoked. The law of the Medes and Persians said that if a king signed this particular type of injunction, this particular type of law, if you did it in a particular kind of way, whatever that may be, that even that king himself could not revoke the law. And if he attempted to revoke the law, he himself would be guilty of it and would bear the punishment also. So look what they did. They lied to that king. Okay, they lied to him. They set him up all the way around. They told him exactly what to do. They did what? They fed into that thing that often kings have of grandeur and glory. And then they entrapped him. They trapped him within his own law. You don't know this yet, but you'll see it when we see the balance of the count. Verse 9, what does it say? Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is the injunction. He says, oh, yeah, man, that sounds great. I'm glad y'all think so highly. That's a great idea. And, there's probably a lot of arguments behind this whole thing because, he was conquering all these kingdoms. You want all the people to be solidified around a particular kind of thing. So let's just get them for 30 days, just for 30 days time, that you can't make any kind of petition to your God or to man, nobody else except to the king. Everybody's going to glorify the king for 30 days. And then after that, it'll be fine. It sounds so reasonable, but it wasn't. And the king didn't know it, but he's being set up. Well, my time's up. Again, I'm Dale. I'll see you next time. We'll continue the story, okay? Goodbye.